Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, brought to you by Byrne Production Services. Here, we explore the different ways business events can bring value to your organization, the latest technological advances in the event space, as well as providing you with actionable strategies to make a business event a success. Let's create an exceptional event experience.
Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the business events podcast. And today I'm joined by Kate Swick, the Director of Corporate Events at Vena Solutions in Toronto. Kate has spent the last 24 years of her career working in events, from working as a production coordinator for the Niagara Seafood Gala to managing event operations for venues and events across North America. Her expertise in live and virtual events knows no limits. And I had to get her on to talk about the so what factor of attendee experience post-COVID. It's a really hot topic and something we talk about quite a lot when it comes to customer relations or finding the value for your attendees. The question they're going to ask is, this is cool, but so what? So welcome to the show, Kate, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So I touched a bit of it in the intro, but can you tell me a little bit more about your career and motivations so far? When did you first get the bug for events and event management?
Yeah, I didn't know I wanted to be in events. I initially went to school way back in the day for forensics. So big pivot there. And then as part of kind of my summers, I'm lucky enough to have an uncle that runs huge concerts and things like that in and around Canada. So as one of my summer jobs, he was like, do you want to come and help? Which was where I kind of got my feet wet. And I was like, this just opened up a whole new world. It was super fun. I personally like to be behind the camera. So this is, you're lucky because usually I'm telling people absolutely not. But it's one of those things that you get a lens into not only kind of the human factor, but also kind of how things tick, which is really what interests me. So over the years, I know you mentioned this, I've kind of done it all. I started doing international events. I've done them all over the world, large scale conferences, fashion shows, trade shows, conventions. And then I went into the association side, worked with a lot of the government here in Canada, doing different things within supply chain, which during COVID was a very hot topic because supply chain was being blamed on everything. And then most recently, I moved back to the private sector, working with Vena Solutions, which is a technology platform. And I've kind of been doing that ever since. So we still do large scale events, but kind of dabble with small ones as well. And back to the international stomping ground because, who doesn't like to travel?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what are two things that you always try to accomplish with each event that you're working on?
Yeah, so I think the most important is setting those objectives very early on. So understanding from your stakeholders, what are they trying to achieve? So is that, a sales target or ROI, but really understanding why they want to do it and why they want to make that investment, because events are certainly an investment for organizations globally. And then from there, working to ensure that the team understands what they need to do. And then on the flip side is bringing that back to reality. So what were the successes of the event? What was the overall outcome? And bringing that back so that the stakeholders can understand, was their investment successful? Was there other things that we need to move on with? And then, of course, how do we scale? That's always something that I always get asked in those post-event meetings because I've been very lucky that the events that I've worked on have generated amazing pipeline or done kind of exactly what they're looking for. So it's always kind of that next question of, okay, we did it once, how do we scale from here? So finding those new ways to kind of unlock and pull levers where needed.
Yeah, absolutely. That scalability question that you just brought up is one of the bigger challenges, I think, that sort of catches event professionals in like a deer in headlights moment. Mm-hmm. They're running off the high of like, hey, this was super successful. And then their C-suite executive or their stakeholder comes in and says, cool, that worked so well. Now, how do we grow it? And they
Yeah.
go, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important metric. So from your perspective, what sort of like, other than the obvious, what sort of happened to events after the pandemic hit? And like, what are the events you were working on at the time that were affected, and how did you navigate that turbulent sort of guessing game that came from the pandemic?
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there. So I think that with COVID, we certainly saw, of course, the initial sweep across the board where it was like, you had ongoing conferences. I had massive conferences planned in Toronto at the time. And it really kind of went from, oh, this is no big deal, it's just a flu, to the whole world shutting down, right? So one of the things that I noticed immediately was it created new opportunities. So yes, your physical event was completely canceled in a lot of instances and for a significant amount of time for a lot of organizations, but it unlocked a new way for us to conduct events. So that was really where I saw the strong emergence of virtual events. So in the event world, we had started to see them kind of coming up where we offer a virtual opportunity or virtual streaming and things like that. But the tangibility still was on the in-person experience, right? Where that's really where people were making that investment, where the COVID really unlocked what we could do virtually. So it went from let's do sessions to unlocking trade show opportunities to unlocking networking spaces. So I think that going through COVID, it put a lot of pressure on the teams, especially, to come up with new ways for those events to move forward, whether it was, completely canceling or moving into a virtual. Myself, we and my organization that I worked with previously, we decided to pivot. So instead of doing it just in person, we took it and we said, okay, of course we needed to delay it because that's a pretty big shift. But we actually made those virtual experiences come to life. And when you measure it, it unlocks more geographic opportunities. So where you might be doing something in North America or you might be doing something overseas, you do typically see, of course, a strong attendance from that local area or from that region, where the virtual opportunity kind of unlocked that. And we saw people globally that were able to attend now, which really in hindsight helps you to scale in a different way. So you can look at it to say, okay, if we can get 1,000 people on site, but over 5,000 people that can attend virtually, your event just went from being, a large scale conference to a summit or something that's globally watched. So I think that that's really where that pivot shifted. And then coming out of COVID, because we had those learnings and because people started to see, well, I don't need to leave my home. I can stay here and I can still tune into really good opportunities and education and content. Now it became, so what? So you're doing a conference and you want me to come. Why am I coming? So it really flipped the script for event planners, producers, things like that on how we did events previously. And then coming out of COVID is kind of what that landscape is moving forward.
Yeah. So, you're hitting on it perfectly there. The so what factor, which I think we're going to get into in a bit of a deeper dive in a couple of minutes. But, that's, how did that, like when you first started working virtually in the pandemic, out of necessity, because I think we all did, first, how did you start to change your processes to perfect that virtual event? And then is that where you sort of started to think through that process of the so what? And what so what did you come up with for virtual events? And I asked that specifically because, you're sitting in front of a computer, you could watch YouTube or I could watch this. Mm-hmm. So what? Like what is the thing that you found that drew your audiences to your virtual content?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So when I came out of school, this was before virtual events were even a thing. So I myself, during COVID, really had to learn quickly what a virtual event is, how to build those out. And building an event virtually versus in person is night and day. It's completely different. So it has completely different tools, assets, requirements, as well as experiences. So I think coming into COVID, we were able to pivot and we were able to learn those and understand, okay, this is what the virtual world means. But then merging those two together is, again, a completely different world. So very quickly into COVID, when they started to look at coming out and how things would go back to normal, I started to think about, okay, I'm sure that many event planners kind of had this as well in the back of their minds, is because we've unlocked this new realm of events and we've opened up this new way of streaming virtually, how do we get people to go back in person, especially from a corporate side of things? There's always going to be concerts and games and, things like that. But from a conference perspective, you're not only looking at it from an investment for money, you're looking at an investment in time. And as we all know, coming out of COVID, time is something that is very, very precious to people. So if there's one thing that COVID taught us, it's that, taking that step back and understanding family and all of that. So if you're asking somebody to come out in person, I really tried to take a look at it from, okay, if it was me, I work from home. You took it kind of right out of what I was going to say, because I work from home. I very rarely go into the office. I'm very, very lucky that way. So for me to leave and go even to an event or something like that myself, I always look at it as, okay, I'm going to miss dinner with my family. I'm going to have to get on a plane. I'm going to have to do this. So really initially working with my team to say, okay, if we look at it from a person-to-person basis, instead of always what the company wants, that is what's going to get those people to come out. So having an opportunity that they cannot get virtually, still offering virtual, don't get me wrong. You want to always have that as, a piece of the event game. But when you look at the in-person experience, is what is unlocking a different method. So if they are going to make that investment, time, money, energy, and they're going to come out, it can't just be for one siloed thing. And every person will look at an event differently. There will be people that come out for professional development or education or CPD, CPE credits, partner acquisition, things like that. So you have to look at it from a point of, okay, if we have almost 2 events that encompass one event, how does that move forward? So what we looked at with Vena was we have the online opportunity, which gives them access to certain sessions, where the on-site participants get an in-depth experience where they can tangibly take things away, whether it's through workshops or labs, gala networking, things like that, but still with that education in the background. I think that that's where you see the successes in those conferences that are still going on, because we're really putting a lens into, like you said, the so what, and what is it that an attendee is going to make it tick?
Absolutely. So do you think it's more of that? Is that more of a natural evolution, or like, is that a change that we need to be more purposeful about driving into the future?
I think we need to be very purposeful. I think for the event professionals like myself that really looked at it as, this isn't going anywhere. We're never going to go back to normal within the event industry. It's always ever evolving. It always has been, it always will be. So I think especially for the folks that are coming out of school, which I'm really lucky to sit on a couple of boards with, I always am telling the curriculum directors, they need to have a strong focus in the virtual world. So not only from the budgets and the contracting and the catering and all of that great stuff, but understanding what goes into that strategic overview. So if you're looking at a portfolio of a year and your stakeholders have a certain ROI that they're looking for, what is going to get us to achieve that with the underlying of the attendees' wants and needs?
So what are you seeing that attendees want from an event nowadays that they didn't before? Right? And how's that notion of the attendee experience evolved?
Yeah, I think for the attendees especially, they still want to have that connection. So that's really why they're coming, right? They want that person-to-person connection. They want to be able to have that experience, but layering it with different opportunities. So understanding that you're going to get everything from C-suite all the way down to entry level, and what really are they coming out for? So you might have people that are coming just for those roundtable discussions or those labs to really get their hands dirty, those thought leadership sessions. So I think when you're in that theming process in those infancy stages of building that event with the team is understanding, okay, what is it that we're trying to push here? Is it, a product? Is it an awareness campaign? Is it understanding, giving them more education, or of course, those ever important CPD, CPE credits for certain communities? So I think that still is a piece of it, but you have to kind of understand. I think gone are the days where we would go to a conference for a week. Pre-pandemic, you could easily plan a week-long conference. People would come. What I'm finding now is people are a lot more protective of their time and how they're spending that time. So if it's going to cost travel, accommodation, they need to have something on site that isn't just something they could get online, to your point. Like, why would I come here when I can just go on YouTube? Or why would I come here when I can just watch the live stream later? So you really have to see what's going to make them tick. And for different events, it might mean different things that you need to hone in on. And my team works really well at kind of looking at what the landscape is. So if we're going to theme it in a certain way, how and who are we targeting? And what in that target market is going to make them want to come on site and make that investment?
So can you tell me a little bit about the specific strategies you've been using to organize events that puts that attendee experience as that priority? And, contrastly, that's a bad word, but you get it. How does one mirror this into that virtual experience? I think that's one of the things that event professionals have been struggling with since, early 2021, 2022, where they keep thinking of it as separate experiences. And so therefore completely different metrics and value propositions. But, are there things that, when you, as you said, when you're planning for that that in-person exclusivity, is there anything that is informed into the virtual solution that can inform each other?
Yeah. So what we do is, from the initial days, we'll start to work with our content teams, our web teams, to really understand what is hot topic specifically for what I'm working on right now is what's hot topic within the finance industry. But this could easily be done within supply chain, government, what have you. So really understanding what is top of mind and how do you get those experts there so that they can have those experiences. And then for us, it's creating, to your point, having that virtual versus in person. So your virtual might look a little bit different. It might be more thought leadership led because that, of course, goes to a wider audience. Where when you're looking at in person, specifically, you want to make sure, okay, if we're doing a lab, what is this lab on? How is it teaching them? What are they going to come away with? So really looking at those objectives that they can tangibly take with them back to their teams to say, well, I was there, I learned X, Y, and Z, and this is how we can maximize efficiency. And I think that that's really what we look at is topically, what is making the industry tick or what's making them stay up at night? I know that's a really big buzzword right now. And how do we translate those into content that they can take away? So still looking at them as the same event, but packaging them differently. So the virtual experience might look a little bit different than the in-person experience. So what they might get virtually, they can't get in person and say in kind of one or the other. So we work really hand in hand across all of our different cross-functional teams to say, okay, if this is the theme that we're going to be moving on site with or as an event with, how do we package these two differently? And what do we want to make those two differently? And then making sure that all of the communications, what we do as well as we build event kits, which is really popular for some organizations. So because we rely heavily on the different teams to communicate this out, packaging them up almost like a little present to say, what is the who, what, why of the event? How do they invite somebody? Where is it happening? And where is the data behind it? So linking everything back to data that we've acquired to say, this is why they are going to come. This is why they should be there. And here's what they can come away with.
Yeah, I really like how you just love that thing that you just touched on about the efficiency of that content. That you can have, say, somebody who's leading one of your workshops or one of your labs, and there is a lot of value to that individual running that lab in person at an event. But then you can leverage that same person as a thought leader to do like a session afterwards in this little pop-up studio, like as a podcast or as a part of your virtual broadcast for the day. So you're leveraging the efficiency of the person, but using that same thought leadership and the same content in two different contexts for the two different audiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that coming out of COVID, we have to put even a stronger lens on. You can't just do an event to do an event. There has to be kind of that reason behind it. So really working with those teams that you have, if you have them, some organizations don't, we're very lucky that we do, to have your pulse on the industry. You have to know what you're going to be presenting on before you go in and try and do it. And then pull those levers, to your point. I mean, if you have an influencer or you have one of those strong names that are going to be coming, use them in multiple ways, whether they're doing a thought leadership for the live stream, but then for the people on site, they're going to do a deep dive into a lab or training or something like that. Those are things that people can come to an event with and make that business case for their boss to say, if I go, these are the things I can come away with, instead of it just being, I get to go and have some cheese and some wine.
Yeah. So can you tell me about some of the ways that you're using specific analytics and attendee feedback to inform some of those decisions?
Yeah. So what we'll do is as many do, we do a post-event, but we also do polling surveys throughout. So as we're trying to build out what that event might look like, we start to pull what we call our pulse groups. So we have a community where I work where it's really highly invested folks that are very, very much invested in the organization and the future of the industry that they work in. So we can pull them to see, what are certain topics that they might like, or what are they looking for within the workplace? What keeps them up at night? What are they looking at, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 24 months from now? So that we can look at it as a strategy behind how we theme that event and how we move forward with it. And then looking at the data. So if we know we're going to be doing it in the US, what does that industry look like in those certain pockets? What does that industry or pulse look like from an economic point of view, as well as a strategic point of view? Because we all know coming out of COVID, there has been certain industries that have been affected by what's called, the mini recessions and things like that. So from an economic standpoint, we want to make sure that we're in their backyards to give them easier access and being more regionally focused. So what we used to do was what we call global conferences, and those still happen. They're not going anywhere. But I think what has come out of COVID is building those smaller regional events where they're still large in size, but they're not those mega conferences that go on, right? So you might do 3 in the year throughout, maybe 1 in North America or 2 in North America and a few overseas, so that you can reach those people more individually, so that they don't always feel like they can only participate virtually or they can only participate in one way or the other, that you're building that into your strategy to say, if you miss this location, for example, we're unlocking some more locations and you get to come to see us there. And then you're building that into their awareness strategy so that they can know, when I'm doing my budget planning, I can say, oh, I know that they're going to be in my backyard and I can go there. So instead of having an investment of several $1,000s, it could be, a couple or even a few $100s, depending on if it's that local to you. So I think it's just looking at it in a much different way. And even for me, kind of flipping those switches and kind of having those wires rewired is what I think the future of events looks like. And events are ever changing. I mean, what it looks like even today, 10 years from now, is going to be completely different. So I think just having that lens to never get comfortable, always be agile, and make sure that you're kind of always looking for trends in the future, that's what will set your events apart from others.
I really like that strategy of sort of the unlocking of the different destinations, and it sort of goes back to the old yield star system, right? Mm-hmm. Based on film, like it feels like you could make your content shareable and have enormous reach through virtual, which would then, for lack of a better term, create some kind of fan base, right?
Absolutely.
Of like Vena, like has all of these thought leaders, and I watch it every year. And now they're coming to Dusseldorf, which is great. I
Yeah.
can't wait to go to them live, right? And I think it positions a lot of brands in a really opportune space to leverage that what content used to be sort of stuck in a ballroom in Vegas
Yeah.
is now sort of out there in the world and pushes the brand narrative and the positioning so that when you decide, hey, we're going to Dusseldorf next year, you get a lot of people excited in Dusseldorf.
Yeah.
And you didn't have it's not an uphill battle.
No, it allows you to unlock that data as well. So if you do have something at at the beginning of the year, let's say, so this is kind of what we do is we look at it from, we do one and we base data on that, on what people want to see, on what they're, looking for. And then to unlock those subsequent locations, you're just playing and piggybacking off of a larger scale event or a large scale conference. So you're really looking at it as, okay, if this is kind of our pinnacle, this is what we're looking at as our pinnacle event for the year, that's where those spinoffs can come from. But also, it's not just additional events. We look at it as from blogs. We look at it for content that we can put on the website or things that people are pushing for, templating. So it really allows us to open the windows and say, okay, if these were really popular and this is what people are coming for, how do we do spinoffs in these other locations to almost keep that narrative going? So we're always in the backs of your minds. If somebody says, oh, I need education or I need more information on this, they're coming to us. We become that go-to within the marketplace, which sets us apart from others.
Yeah, it goes down to, and I think Seth Godin says this quite a lot, right? That, your audience will tell you what they want. You just have to listen, right?
Exactly.
And so I think whether you're an event professional or you're sort of like Venn diagramming into sort of content marketing or your marketing department, that's always the struggle. We don't know what our audience wants. We're going to try, we're going to experiment, we're going to measure, we're going to do. But I personally think that your audiences are telling you what they want to hear from you and what they want to invest their time. So you just have to listen, and you will hear that so what, right? And so then, this is leading me to a question about, how are you communicating the potential value of that? And I mean that in the context that I think a lot of event professionals struggle with when they think of, because it's not cheap to produce virtual content and have, I hate this word, but the hybrid event and all of those kind of things. And that has been one of the biggest barriers that a lot of event planners, especially internally, have had in trying to sell that to the C-suite, that they're like, yeah, my budget's going to go up 30% or 40% or whatever it might be to add cameras and broadcast. But, what is, is there a measure that you guys are using to say, yes, we may be spending a little bit more money on this, but here's the value we are creating and we can see this rolling out over it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So what we do is we're always going to have virtual content. People will digest that. So I think what you do is you package it differently. So for the conference, what we do is we package, the who, what, why, similar to how we would do those same packages for our virtual events. But for those that would have to travel to an in-person event, we always, or I've kind of brought to this organization as a business case. So something that they can download from the website that has the reason to attend. And all that person has to do is plug in, their name, their flight costs, their accommodation costs, but it already is built out with what they're going to get tangibly from that and bring back to their teams to help build that. So for the live streams or for webinars or any virtual event that you're doing, you still have to look at it with the same measure, but also with the inkling in the back of your mind of people will digest things in smaller capacities virtually. So where they'll go to a ballroom and they'll sit there for a few hours and listen virtually, you've got, your Slack pinging, you've got Outlook going on, you've got all the meetings that you need to go to. So you need to digest them differently and you need to package them in a different way. So again, going back to that data of what is it that they want to see And how can we make that come to life? So doing it in small snippets, no more than an hour or 2 hours, depending on kind of what format, whether it's a demo or a training workshop or a webinar type deal, but still keeping in the back of their minds and promoting it as here is what you'll take away as key learnings from doing this. And for virtual events, making sure we're again very lucky that we have a production team in-house where we can lean on them to take that content and repurpose it through a YouTube channel so that people at a later date can look at it or refer back to it. But really making sure that you're reaching your audiences. So if you can segment those lists, I always say segment because people are getting on average, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if people are getting like 100 emails a day between work and personal. I mean, it seems like everyone's, all those stores are coming out with those sales, right? So really making sure that you're segmenting those lists. So working with your teams to say, okay, if this is the audience that it would best suit, let's build a strategy behind hitting that audience and in a respectful way. So instead of it being, every day or every other day, having a certain number of campaign emails before that event and working within that time frame. So where we are, we have different events and all of those events have different lead times. So we work between those lead times and then we'll work with our various teams to say, okay, this campaign needs this many emails and we need to make sure that this many emails are done before the event. And this is the segment that we're going to be hitting. And you could get as specific as industry, job title, location, but really trying to zone in instead of assuming every event is for every person. If you're going to do something virtually, hone in on it. And then always going back to the data. So something that we're actually just in the process of right now is looking at that data from last year going into this year to say, where were some of those successes or where are some things that we could, have put on the back burner for this coming year, reassess how we're doing things and then re-push them out. But leaning in on those successes and looking at it to say, okay, how do we do more of these? And how do we make sure that we're always on top of the content? Because you don't want to be coming up with content just for the sake of it. If you don't have something hot and fresh, don't be afraid to say to your stakeholders, I think we should back burner this for now, or I think we should look at this again in the future, or reassess what this data looks like. You're going to have successes and you're going to have pitfalls. That's always something that comes with events. I think it's how you come out of those or you look at it from a data perspective. And that's something I think people in the event world need to really capitalize on is the data. There is so much data out there, but working with those teams to say, this is the data that I'm looking for so that when you go to make that strategy for the next year, you have fresh, hot data that you can say, this is how we're going to measure for next year. And this is where we should focus our team's time on.
Yeah, I really love the idea of the repurposing content for different channels, and I've been a huge proponent of this since 2022. That your live event is a content factory.
Absolutely.
That builds you all this content and can inform a lot of growth, for the live event, but also for the brand by reallocate some budget from, sitting in a YouTube studio for 3 days, and understand that you can just build that on site for a relatively lower cost. And just because you have all these subject matter experts, because you have the CEO of, Amazon keynoting your show, you got Bezos there, stick them in a room with an interviewer, get a bunch of this content that you can just leverage out over the whole year. So what advice can you give businesses and event organizations who are struggling to find that sort of, so what or wow factor to amplify the content of their events?
Yeah, I think it's looking at it every year and then readdressing it maybe on a quarterly or a semi-annual basis, which is what we do. So we'll sit back to say, okay, if these are the company's objectives, how can events lend to that? And then coming up with a strategy behind that and not just an event strategy, but working with all of the other conduits. So is there a podcast that they're doing? Is there a blog that they're doing? Is there certain things that they can utilize to really push that out? So if you're looking at it as a 12-year cycle, what is it within that 12-month cycle? What is it within that, year that you're trying to focus in on, that you're trying to achieve as an organization? And then leaning on those pillars to see how you can push those out. So again, through online content, in-person content, or, maybe it's just written content that they can push out and promote. Is it participating in third-party events? I think that you need to set realistic targets as well. So you need to sit down as a full team with the senior leaders, stakeholders, everyone involved to say, okay, this is how much we can take on as a team. This is what we think that we can achieve within a year, and measuring it throughout. So again, having those reflections to say, okay, if we're looking at an event in XYZ amount of date, how much lead time does that need? What do we need that goes into that? But really refocusing all of your energies into a collaborative agreement where everyone is coming to the table with their own respective expertise to say, this is the data that this is showing with regards to topics that we could hit. This is locations that we should be looking at. This is how we can repackage content and work on those strategies. And then working with the different teams to say, is this something that we can do? And then always being hot and fresh with your technologies. So working with those different departments to say, okay, if we know we're going to be doing virtual events, how do we do them better? How do we streamline? Ever evolving, ever changing. I think that's always the undertone of events, and not to get comfortable. That's what I always say to my team is never get comfortable, because things are going to change tomorrow. So we never predicted COVID. COVID almost came as a blessing in some ways for the events industry, because it allowed us to take a step back and say, okay, where is this going? Because we couldn't stay in that method forever. We couldn't stay in that constant, week long, this is the event world. It was inevitable to change. This just gave us that push.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. That COVID certainly shook us rather violently out of our old stagnant practices and made us think outside the box to survive. And I think, certainly tragic for many reasons, but definitely something that made us all sort of rethink what is Priya's book about purpose? Like why are we doing this? And it made us ask those questions rather than just sort of sit on our laurels and say, but it's always been done this way.
Yes. Yeah. No, we threw that out when I came to this organization as well. We've always done this way. And I'm like, but why? Can we change it? How do we change it? So it's really just working with those teams and coming up with new strategies and new ways to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, I always like at the end of these interviews to ask you, because knowing that we have a large event organizer, event planner listening audience, what are the practical steps that an event professional could take after listening to this episode to really address that so what factor with their attendees, their stakeholders, or whoever it might be?
I would look at all of the events. So I would take a step back, look at your entire portfolio for the years, from an actual microscopic level to say, okay, and each individual event, look at it in its own way. So why are we doing this? What is the outcome that we're looking to achieve? Do those match up? If they do, then setting realistic goals throughout the year. I think also understanding that there's going to be events that have to fall off the radar to make room for new events, and take risks. I mean, everyone, I always get asked this, and I think as part of the event industry, we cannot be afraid to take a risk. And there's going to be pitfalls. You're going to fall down sometimes, or they're not going to be a success, but you won't know until you try. And that was something that we've been really great at. And this past year, we have the data to show, oh my goodness, something we had no idea would be popular came out with a, dynamite stick. So I think really examining what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're hoping to achieve, and then tying all of those back to what is in it for the attendee.
Absolutely. Well, Kate, thank you so much for joining me on Production Value Matters. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And where can people reach out to you if they're interested in learning more about that so what factor?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the easiest. And then if we connect, happy to give you my email and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To find out more about Byrne Production Services and how putting on events can drive value for your business, visit byrneproductionservices.com. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Production Value Matters, thank you so much for listening.